First item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
I have a motion by Y and a second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 2 is public input. This is the time set aside for anyone who would like to make a public comment. Just step forward and do so. Seeing no one, we'll move on. Item 3 is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
A motion by Vilhauer and a second by Radomski. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 4 is a presentation, review, and public input on the proposed capital improvement plan book available for review at the finance office in City Hall. And our finance officer, Kristen Bobzien, will make this presentation. So go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you, Mayor. And I see all the department heads are here and excited. So just a little bit to start. As we go through this, we're going to kind of go department by department. And some of them I won't really even cover. There's not a lot of changes from the last year's plan, so it's just some of that movement forward. So I won't touch on them too much. As we do start to discuss, if there's any questions that the council has, as I said, the department heads are all here to answer any of those. And if at any time the council wants to adjust, make a change to what's in the plan, just a motion and a second to do that, and that would be recommended then to the council meeting, because this item is on it for final approval too. So as we get going, anytime, just interrupt. So the very first part, pages, let's see, 3 through 5 is a little bit of a summary. It kind of breaks down what all is in the 5-year plan. Some kind of interesting information is the bottom of 3. That breaks down the 5 years by their function, whether it be general government, public safety, public works. As you can see, our 21, 22, and 23 are pretty consistent around 17 to 19 million, and then 24 and 25 are kind of a slowdown. That's not necessarily that they won't have more, but it's just at this point, I don't think that far out have we maybe identified certain projects. So that's just some information that you guys can all read, look through. And then on page 5, we kind of break down where the revenue sources are to meet those needs. So that's as you're looking through it. If you want to see kind of the big picture, the summary is kind of an interesting part to read. So, Glenn?
Kristen, the CIP plan, you sent that out about 3 months ago. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, I know you've also been involved in some meetings and have sent us some information as a council for consideration. Anything in that subsequent information that would affect this, or is this still good to go through tonight as is?
Some of the information that we have received from about that July, August till now has been incorporated. There's some things that are still kind of up in the air, so they're pretty consistent with what we thought in July and August. The nice thing with our plan is we can move it at any time. So as things change, we know there's a couple of things that are kind of irons in the fire, and if those would change, we'd be able to adjust this without any issues. Yep. So if we get started, page 6 is just government buildings. There's no changes to that. That's the $5 million that we have for the new administrative building, and that's set for 2023. So no changes, just movement forward from the last year's plan. If we go on to the next department, it's information technology, the IT department. Now I know that this one looks like, if you look too at the bottom, I should cover that too. At the bottom of each page, it's kind of a snapshot of what changes have been made from previous years. So as you look at that, it looks like IT just kind of added everything. But what that is it's not necessarily an increase of the IT items, computers, printers, software, any of that. We're kind of trying to adapt a new change where the IT department is helping control kind of all of the computer and software equipment instead of having these little pieces in each department. This gives the IT department control over who needs a new computer on the rotation, when it's needed, and then it kind of gives us the picture of how much we're actually spending for IT. In the past, it's been these little pieces in everybody's department, and I don't think it's given us really how much do we spend every year on our computers and printers and all that stuff. So it's a change. So that's why it looks like everything's been added, but everything was actually removed from the other departments. So if there's no questions, then we move on to,
Is this based upon IT's recommendation as far as the timing of this, or are we pushing some things back that we should look at moving up? Or I guess I'd like to know if this is IT's recommendation.
no, this is IT's recommendation. Also, IT worked very closely with the departments. So they all kind of had their rotation schedules that IT was aware of, and they've worked together to kind of get this. So going forward, what we hope this does is it lets IT keep track specifically of each department, but I think all departments were on board with it too. So, yep.
Adam has a question.
Kristen, will this help streamline, maybe save some costs if we're looking at buying, say 100 computers versus 20 computers or something along those lines?
I don't know if it's so much going to be a cost savings, but I think it's efficiency for the IT department. This way, it's letting IT have that control. I mean, as I stated, it's always been a normal rotation for the printers and the computers, but I think it was more difficult for IT to kind of piece it. This way, it's theirs. They know how much money they have. They know what they can get done with those dollars. So it's probably more efficiency than really cost savings. So, okay. Okay. The other thing, too, before we continue on is I will make note that if you look at the top of each department, it kind of breaks down their rotation for all equipment. You'll see some of this stuff won't ever hit the long-term plan now that we changed that limit to the 50,000. But if you ever do wonder how often they rotate their equipment, you can identify it at the top of the sheet. The next department is the police department. No significant changes other than they moved back their carpet and vinyl flooring from 2024 to 2025. Other than that, consistent. They've kept their patrol cars the same to try to budget for the 4 each year. So, then if we go on to the fire department, again, like I said, their equipment replacement, you can see the years. So if you ever question how often they're replacing the equipment, you can see that. There were no changes from previous years, so this is just that steady movement up each year. There's no questions. Like I said, the equipment replacement, they usually follow a pretty steady what their replacement schedule is, or if something comes up, then they do try to move that forward or push it back if it can wait a little bit. So that's our expectation.
Was that East Fire Station, was that 2023 last year, or did we move that back another year?
That was 2023 last year too, yep. So it's just now moved itself up. So, then if we go to the ambulance department, the only change there is kind of increases to the actual cost. So I'm sure what has happened here is Doug and Don have identified that some of the new equipment is a little bit higher. And I think the other thing that we changed is some of that, the purchasing of the ambulances, there's certain built-in components of the ambulance that really should be captured in the cost of the ambulance versus necessarily as separate equipment. So, okay, we'll just keep on moving because I'm sure we'll get to a few that we have to stop at. Next department is the street department. A lot of this is a little bit of increases. The biggest one is for the new building and land in 2021. That had a price tag of about 3.9, and we've increased that to 4.4 million. And then it looks like they upped a few of their other equipment pieces as well, and I'm sure that's just with the fact that they now know what a lot of that equipment is costing. The only thing that was added to the plan that wasn't in last year's plan is the truck scale and concrete pad. And it looks like, I think, and Rob can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the thought was once the land and new building are in, they really thought having a permanent type of scale there at the facility would be a benefit. So I think then this was placed after they had done some more thought of the new building. Correct? Okay.
Is there any, in that 4.45, is there anything for the current site as far as a value and return type of deal if they were to sell that?
I don't think there is. This would just be the cost of it. Anything that we had that came in toward it would essentially offset it, but this is still what we're thinking would be the land and construction cost.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. The next department is the snow removal department, and there was no changes from the previous years. It's just everything's kind of moving up. I will point out when we look at the general fund and we talk about the equipment, as far as you sometimes hear me say that I set aside for the capital, the majority of that capital that's set aside is between the street department and the snow removal department. And you can probably see that when you look at the total cost of some of their pieces of equipment. It's pretty expensive equipment. So I will say that when it comes to the planning of certain pieces of equipment, it's really important for these two departments to kind of get it right, because it's pretty heavy on the dollars. So next department is the cemetery. There again, no changes, just some movement forward. They have an office remodel and then some repairs to the roads out there. So, but no changes from last year's plan. Okay, no questions on that. We will go to the forestry, and I know there's been some talk in this, so I expect some questions out of this. This is just the requests that were made during the budget process, and I know we've had some discussions of adding equipment because of potential concerns with forestry and the trees. So as of right now, we've added the chipper in 2021, and then we did put in a tree spade in 2023, and those were additions to last year's plans. So I don't know if there's any questions. I do know that Terry's here if we want to discuss anything or if there's anything the council wants to add, talk about.
Councilman Albertson?
We did talk, and I think that's what you're making reference to, the truck with the chop saw on it, and Terry sent a note to me, which I appreciated. He said, well, we don't want to make that a major item. On the other hand, I'm thinking maybe we do, because if our guys have to take, and Terry would know the number of trees that are dangerous out at Cattail, but I'm saying 40 maybe that are marked. And also then we have the ash trees, and I'm wondering, why would we wait if we can, and I don't know, I wouldn't say declare an emergency, but on the other hand, I think it's probably an emergency to get something that will help these guys make it quicker to take a tree down and to dispose of it.
And I think, Terry, do you want to speak to
Yeah, I'll speak to it. You know, Councilman Albertson, Councilman Bueller being on our board as the liaison, it's been a hot topic. I mean, it's a piece of equipment that we do see essential when emerald ash borer hits Watertown. Is it here now? You know, we don't know. We have not discovered it. But we do feel it, you know, and I talked to Councilman Bueller, and what we plan on doing, when it became a hot topic and we discovered this piece of equipment, we were past the budget process. Talking with our forestry superintendent at the time, we didn't feel the $300,000 piece of equipment justified the emergency spending. One, our staffing level needs to be looked at for efficiencies and find out who's going to run this piece of equipment while we still maintain, you know, the smaller things like stumping and that type of thing. So then I met with Kristen, and we plan on putting that as a request in 2021 and basically bypassing the long term and actually trying to get it in the 2021 capital. And we feel comfortable as a staff that that'll probably be about the time that we truly need to, one, learn how to operate the piece of equipment and when it'll become, you know, efficient within the system. As far as, you know, you're completely right, Dan, as far as we have about 62 trees just at Cattail Crossing that are marked for hazardous. The zoo has a couple. With a two-man forestry crew, it is difficult. With the manpower we have, the equipment that we have, the size of boom trucks we have contracted out with private contractors that do have this saw. But I just felt at the time that I did not want to come to the council with a straight face and say, I have to have this $300,000 now. I simply couldn't come to you with that. But I do feel 2021 it'll be something that I will push very hard for. If that kind of clarifies some of the questions.
Councilman Vilhauer?
TK, at the Park and Rec Board meeting last week, your forestry had mentioned about having a demonstration done later on this month. Invited us and whoever wants to come out. Is that going to happen? Or?
Yeah, yes, it will. Thank you. Then email will go out to the council as well as the Park and Rec Board. November 19th, I believe it's 2 p.m. We are hoping to do the golf course, and that's going to be contingent on the grass. We're hoping we get a freeze where we can take this heavy machinery onto that course without doing any damage as far as ruts from the tires, things like that. So our hope is November 19th, and that is a firm date if you want to write it down, 2 p.m., location to be determined, but we do anticipate the golf course. Behind Yellow 6 is where we anticipate doing that demonstration for the council and the board.
I would encourage whoever can make it to take a look at that after seeing that operate at, when we had a bunch of trees cleared out at Summerwood this summer and seeing that operate, I think it'd be money well spent eventually to acquire it, but again, let's take a look at it, and so I would encourage whoever can to take a look at that demonstration.
And I spoke to the city of Sioux Falls. They feel right now they're at 2-to-1 tree removal, and they think once their operator is completely trained, they'll be at 3-to-1 tree removal. So
What do you mean by that?
as far as, if it takes 3 hours to take a tree down with standard equipment, they're taking 2 down in 3 hours. And they feel once they're trained, they can take 3 trees down in 3 hours, So they're thinking the process is going to eventually get to about a 3-to-1 versus your standardized equipment, your bucket truck, your chainsaws, that kind of thing. So they're about 2-to-1 right now, the city of Sioux Falls is with their grapple saw.
Okay. Councilman Lallam?
DK, do you know roughly what they charge us now per tree? Like if we go to outside contractors?
Contracted out, we've paid for I believe it was a 14-inch caliper tree. I believe we paid about $1,100. We had a large cottonwood that we just simply didn't have the equipment, the height, the boom, and I believe that one was about $1,900 per tree. So when you add that up, and we have roughly 5,000 elm trees in Watertown that are eventually going to be removed, it's a cost savings to the city, all said and done. So.
Are you going to have them do 60 demonstrations at the golf course?
I'm going to have them demonstrate as long as they can. So, I think as the council, we say, I didn't get it. Can we move to this tree? So, no, I do think the council and the board are going to be convinced, and I alluded to Bruce, and no different than Rob needs a plow, and no different than, Doug needs an ambulance. The forestry department needs modernized equipment to keep up with the demand from the public and this emerald ash borer.
And if it does come, it's one of those things you're going to have to start taking down, and if you're going to contract it out, we might as well try to save money where we can.
Absolutely.
What's the time it'll take to train somebody, did they say?
They felt about 3-4 months that somebody is very proficient with it. They go actually to a class. It's a 2 or 3 day where they go down, learn to operate the piece of equipment, and then it's kind of a hands-on as you get, used to using it. Your skills get better and better. So
Put on by the manufacturer?
yes, I believe it's in St. Louis is where it's manufactured out of. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Bueller?
Yeah, I just want to state, like say, Terry, you and I talked about this. I think from a safety standpoint too, I think having a piece of equipment like this would be probably a lot better in that regard. But I think it's important we stay ahead of this thing because it's coming eventually, and I think it's better sooner than later.
Yeah, and we're facing the same problem in City Park. Most of those are elms. Definitely our forestry department's behind, and I won't justify that we're not. But and I'm not saying that would I take open arms, voluntary $300,000 purchase? Absolutely. The sooner the better. But I did feel at this point with our staffing levels that I did not want to put the pressure on our budget when I didn't feel it was a true emergency. But down the road, I'm definitely say it is a need. There's no question.
Okay. Councilman Albertson?
I think safety, I don't know if it was exactly what Bruce was thinking, but I played golf at Cattail Crossings, and those cottonwoods out there are really dangerous. They're dead. There's some branches hanging out there. If somebody were to get hurt, we might think a $300,000 purchase was pretty darn cheap.
Right.
Than having somebody, they just fall down. You can be there, but the wind that we have, I seriously think we ought to take a strong look at it now, today.
Right.
And I understand what you're saying about staff, but either they get trained and they take down 3-to-1, or they don't get trained and they do 1-to-1, one. And
Right, and this may be the wrong thing to say. Mine was out of knowing financially where we stood, and I did not want to come to the council or the board and be the greedy, put this ahead of, but you're exactly right, Dan. The sooner we can get that piece of equipment, the sooner we're trained, the sooner we're taking out 2 trees versus 1 in the same time frame. So obviously that's a council conversation. I won't sit here and say, no, don't have that conversation. But eventually that piece of equipment will need to be in our fleet.
I would support moving things around. I think that's a piece of equipment that saves money and the longer that we have it. And I mean, if we're removing trees every year already, we're doing that
Right.
now, and this will immediately improve our efficiency in removing trees. So over the course of 2020, instead of 60 trees, we'll remove 90 trees,
Right.
or something along those lines. I would support trying to shift our resources to get this done soon.
So the one thing I could suggest then is, because the 2020 budget is set, and I mean, there is always the potential that we could, purchase it in 2020. Is that kind of the direction you're leaning, or are you thinking it would still have to wait until 2021?
Well, to be honest,
As far as training and.
No, as far as training, I mean, we could send somebody south to the training school anytime.
Okay.
It's a case of, if the council's on board with the 2020 purchase, absolutely, I'd be excited, but I do not want to put pressure on the budget.
So then the other option is, if the council would want to, say, place it into 2021, I guess my suggestion would be to take the chipper and the dump truck and move those out of 2021 and place this piece of equipment there.
My only comment, Kristen, is our chipper is
So then you might be buying a chipper and this.
It truly is. We end up having to lease one just to get through. That's something I don't feel comfortable moving on to another year.
We don't have to solve this right now. I just think I want to keep an open mind.
Yep.
About
Yes, and if there is no changes, then we can move on. I will say this is one item, one piece of equipment that will not be forgotten.
Right.
I know that everybody between the Park and Rec, Terry, is keeping an eye, and we're trying to figure out solutions to make sure we get it.
Yeah. Okay, Councilman Vilhauer.
I don't want to make a decision on this either tonight, but and I want to definitely see the demonstration. By the same token, Kristen, walk us through the steps if we do decide that this does make sense to do it in 2020, which is where I'm leaning right now before I see the demonstration. But
Okay.
walk us through what we do need to do if we want to amend 2020.
So our option is once we get to January of 2020 and the budget starts, then anytime the council wants to, I mean, we would have to do a budget supplement, but then you would be taking that from your unrestricted funds out of the general fund and purchasing that piece of equipment. So as there's more demonstrations, talks, if it is determined that we want to do it in 2020, it would take just a council action to supplement that forestry budget. So, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will go on to the library department. There are no changes in the library. That is their standard materials budget with their slight increases each year. And like I said, no changes from the previous year. When we look at the recreation programs under the Park and Rec, they did add a pump tracks in 2022. And I think that's where was that? Do you have a plan for where that is?
Skate park.
Right next to it.
He said, utilize the concrete slab that we have that exists already out by the skate park. He can't hear because he's not in the microphone. So. That's for those out in TV land.
No, it was, and those of you who are not familiar with the pump track, what it is it's your up and down kind of hills where you don't pedal. It's strictly a pedalless bike that goes around. It's pretty common within skate parks. So our plan would be to phase 2 skate park, move it to the east towards the Cook Complex fence because we already have a concrete area, parking, that kind of thing. So.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Okay, and then the next department will be the golf course, and there was actually no changes from previous year's long-term capital plan. So the only addition is for a campus remodel in 2025, but otherwise no changes. And then the next department is the Family Aquatic Center. No changes from last year. And then we go on to the softball, baseball complexes. Now the change that is in there is a decrease to the outfield lighting at Cook Complex in 2024. I did speak with Terry, and there is the potential that we would not be doing that project at all. And the only reason for that is that is now the youth complex, and the majority of the games are never past dark. So spending the $500,000 may not be the route that we take. So we'll leave it in there for now, but potentially as we go through the long-term planning next year, that is an item that could fall off altogether. So just so you kind of know, I know they're still kind of looking at how much those fields would be needed at night. So, okay. The next department is the auditorium field house. The only change there is that they added an auditorium improvement, and that is for the roof at the auditorium. Otherwise, no changes from the previous year. Now, the next one that we'll look at is the zoo. I know there will be some questions on that as we've seen some items come up that need to be considered. The animal care building is in there for 2021. I know everybody is aware that we've had some discussions on what we need to do with the AZA accreditation. So I feel like the long-term plan on the zoo is probably going to see a lot of changes. But I think those are going to be some deeper dives specifically into that. If there's any direct questions, we can cover those. But I think anything dealing with 2020 and 2021 is probably kind of open right now just to see what we need to get done. If there's any council members that want to ask a question or.
Councilman Vilhauer?
I know there was some talk about a presentation at our next council meeting. Is that still in the works, Terry?
Yeah, what's in the works is when we're prepared to bring you solutions, as far as not only solutions but options for the council, that may be the next meeting, it may be the first meeting of December, but the staff is working very diligently to get realistic numbers, realistic options. The staff from, the mayor, we have spoke to the AZA to get a realistic, not what we're seeing on social media, but a true realistic of what we need to ensure our accreditation stays intact. So we are working diligently on presenting you, Lynn, to the council, multiple options, multiple levels of financial commitments to ensure that we do keep AZA accreditation. But there's been a lot of misnomers that have been said, and I think we had a conference call a couple weeks ago that really cleared us up as staff to give us the ability to move forward and get some pricing of what we truly need. So I don't know if the mayor or Kristen wants to expand on that.
Well, I think we need to look at it carefully. I know there's a zoo subcommittee formed, and they've started to meet, and this is a very serious topic, and it's achievable to do the things that we've been mandated to do, but it's going to require some change in thinking and change in where we're putting our money and how we do it. And that we're not ready to, we don't have a plan yet. So when, like you said, that we'll have to formulate that and bring it forward.
Right, and I simply don't want to come before you without firm facts versus assumptions, so.
All right, you want to add to that, Kristen?
All I would say is, like I said, I do feel that the zoo plan right now, as far as it goes for the long term, is probably going to change the most, just even the latter years, just until we determine what we're going to need to do and kind of what we're viewing the zoo as a whole. So you would be adopting this plan as is, but with the thought that it's potentially probably going to change quite a bit.
Right.
So that's all I can really.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay. We will move on from the zoo, and we will go to the ice arena. And the only change there is that they added the ice resurfacer in 2021. As we know, there's obviously still a lot to determine with the ice arena construction. It's not in the long-term plan just because it's still actually sitting out in the capital project fund, not just the ice arena department. So that's why that's not in here. It's because it's in a completely different fund, not the ice arena. So this is just our current ice arena's capital. Okay.
Councilman Lallam?
Kristen, on that, there's equipment replacement schedule for scoreboards, walk behind edger. Do they have a walk behind edger?
Do we have one?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, okay, walk behind, no. Do we have an edger? Yes. It's an older model that edges, but what this would be is more of a modern piece of equipment. But no, I mean, it's staff time is probably an hour longer to do with our handheld versus the walk behind. So that would just be an increase in, again, in efficiency and modern equipment. So.
How old is the one we got?
Been there a
That's
while.
the ice reserve.
When was the arena built? Is that how old it is?
85?
I think 88 was when, yeah, it might be original. But you know what? We edge like you wouldn't believe. I mean, we can edge, so.
Okay, any other questions for the ice? Okay, then the next department we'll look at is the Park Systems Department. There's a few new things added there. They added a new park development in 2022. What this is for any of the new residential areas. These would be new parks to the residential areas of town. And then add a lacrosse field in 2022, and then a park shop remodel in 2023. And those were all additions to the plan from the last time. So, okay.
Councilman Lallam?
Have we identified area for lacrosse fields?
Right now, our strongest thought right now is Mount Hope.
South of Mount Hope?
Yep. You know, but we got to look at the amount of time, you know, our cemetery capacity, you know, that is slated for future cemetery land. Right.
As it would be.
Right. You know, our current cemetery, I think last I looked, we have about 85 years left of capacity in our current cemetery. So we would definitely look at ensuring we don't bind ourselves in within all of a sudden we're out of space. But we would go probably way to the south. So the cemetery could continually, you know, move that direction. We're probably realistically 300 to 400 years before it would ever approach lacrosse fields. I mean, there's that much space out there.
We have land to the west too, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right up. We have land of the west up till the retention pond where Great Plains
Right.
has those practice fields. This is
Where
all
they're
cemetery property.
Currently planting stuff.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So I mean, we're not at the point where we got to be frantic about cemetery space, but you know, lacrosse field, there's no infrastructure, there's no brick and mortar. So if it ever needed to resort back to cemetery property, you know, easily done.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Okay. Our next department will be the city park and camping, and there are actually no changes in there, just the purchase of a mower in 2021. Then we move on to the capital improvement fund. I will say there's been some changes to the way we are going to be moving forward with this. In the past, you've probably seen where we've actually identified every street, the anticipated dollar. Heath has worked to break it down a little bit, I would say broader, but along with that aspect of it being broader, what is nice about that is as streets and improvements change and need to be done, the engineering department would have that ability to do that. We kind of, if we look back to last year, we ran into that where Northridge had some more issues than what was probably in the current budget. So probably budgeting more this way allows us for that flexibility while staying within those dollars. The one thing that I will point out that is nice is if you look across the board, the spending is consistent. So what is nice about that is we don't see a lot of fluctuation year to year and not be able to figure out how to do a really high year versus a low year. And if anybody has any questions, Heath, I'm sure can help answer them.
Councilman Lallam?
Question I got on there is no increases across the board. I mean, that would be one that I would be a little concerned about because as far as I know, they're not going down in price and they're not staying status quo. So, I mean, shouldn't we be looking at an increase of some sort across the board, whether it's a certain percentage every year or not? I mean, I know it's a capital improvement plan, but at the same time, you know the costs are going to go up.
Yes, Councilman Lallam, that's a very good point. We did not include that in this particular long-range outlook, but I couldn't agree more. That's something that we need to look at doing. I don't know as though we've done that in the past either, but with the restructuring that I did for this year, I didn't bother putting any inflationary increases in. But I did note previously in the pavement management system, one of the earlier pavement management system discussions that I had with council, we do have that targeted amount that came out of our pavement management study that we're falling a little short of, that we could, continue to look at too, as far as not only inflationary increases, but increasing the target amount on pavement rehabilitation and reconstruction that we're doing on our street systems as following the terms and the recommendations from that study. We're close to where we should be in that study, but we're still, a few dollars short of where we could be. So that's another thing I'd like to continue to discuss with Kristen and the council as we look at this long-range plan in the coming years.
Well, that was one of the concerns, is I think we got behind because we didn't budget for increases. So, I know that we're trying to play catch-up, and when you're playing catch-up, especially on streets, it's not one that you want to try to catch up quickly.
Yep.
So if we don't see an increase of some sort, that would be an area where I guess I would like to see some sort of an increase, whether it's across the board, a certain percentage, even if it's a couple percent. At least then we're factoring that in, so we know that we're not going to get behind again.
I'll just make a quick response to that as well. And I think we do want to, as you state, increase it just for inflation purposes. The one thing I will say is this is our difficult area of the capital improvement fund, because I will say that when we don't have the dollars, this is obviously the area that's kind of taken away from, and that's what's happened in the past. There again, this is a consistent path of, I think, where we want to be, hopefully to increase. But as I put forth some of the numbers too, if we take on any more debt, I highly doubt we will spend more than this, because there again, your debt will be paid before this will be paid. So those are just the things that, like I said, I think this gets us to show where we want to be, but there's other things that potentially could even make these numbers lower. And that's where some of the decisions I think that we make here in the next couple, even the next year, could really determine what we see happening. We've also discussed other sources of revenue that would significantly change this. So I know right now the plan looks a little like flat, but I think there's a few things within this next year that really will change the plan in general.
Yeah.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Maybe you're answering the question already between you and Heath, but Heath, I know you made a presentation several months ago that definitely caught our attention, or at least my attention, relative to how much short that night you mentioned that we potentially are as far as what we're spending. I mean, we're talking a lot more than just inflationary issues. I mean, are we, leaving ourselves significantly short, or with the analysis that you've done in the meantime, or maybe I misunderstood your presentation a few months ago, but like I say, that definitely caught our attention, that looked like we were significantly short from what we should be spending on our streets.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to look at that from Councilman Vilhauer. Is my understanding, as I researched the pavement management system study several months back, and it's a little bit foggy to me off the cuff here, but the study did come out with a recommendation, and that recommendation was based on, if you remember those curves, you got into that technical analysis of the overall street network and the pavement condition index. The average index for the system, I believe, was in the low 60s. Now, if you look at it from that standpoint, we're sitting fairly decent. To have an average score in the 60s, that's fairly manageable. That's a fairly well-managed street network. But you look at the scope of the number of streets that are in the 40s, a few in the 30s, and then those lower pavement condition indices, those are obviously the ones that we're trying to get fixed and corrected. And it's kind of a worst first scenario that we're in right now. Now, if you take that pavement management system to the next level, you're on a less reactive level of management and on a more proactive level of management. It evolves from worst first to you're doing maintenance and rehabilitation to the system rather than just taking care of the worst first with the money that you have at hand. And that's where the study, I think, steered us towards putting more money into it So we're not simply taking care of the worst first and being retroactively looking at the condition that our streets are in, but becoming more progressive with that management of the system as a whole. So you can look at it a couple ways. The average PCI is fairly decent, but we are managing it worst first scenario based on X number of dollars that we have available, which isn't the most productive way to manage it, but it's getting us by.
Right, and it's, what he had projected was an increase in the level of service that we have right now. So maintaining what we have right now, we can continue on. That's kind of what it's all about. Everybody wants to increase it. And no matter how high we get up on there, there'll always be people that think that we're not high enough. And so it's really a matter of what level of commitment do we want to make as a community. And I think we want to do as much as we can.
I would just kind of toss in, as we go ahead here and we're kind of having these conversations about how we're going to do some of this stuff as we go forward in the year, it would be good, I think, to look at what it would potentially take to meet the standard that was put out to us, just so we have it on the table, so we can have it and be cognizant of it, so we can work maybe towards it. But then at the same time, to be looking at what would our, as we kind of talked about last time, what would our checklist kind of be as we have new developments going, building new roads, and assuring that these roads, when they go in, are up to standard in the first place, so that maybe they can stand the test of time a little bit better, and we're not doing this reactive maintenance. But just something to consider so that we can possibly be proactive and build going forward.
Good point, Councilman Hoyer. Okay.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I think, like I said, I would put this one in the classification kind of as we have the zoo. I see the most change in this, and that just comes with the potential of significant things we'll be doing within the next year. So, okay, if we move on then, we will go to the Upper Big Sioux Watershed Project Fund. That one had a little bit of a change, and that was to actually take the $4 million, and it was split between 2 years, 2023 and 2024, with the potential to add Kempeska Lake improvement projects to that. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that, comments. I know Roger is here.
Councilman Billhauer?
Question I've got is not on the numbers, but I know as of a few months ago, I thought we were about ready to roll out our the consultant's Lake Kempeska master plan document. Where are we at with that, Roger or Mayor or whoever can speak to it?
Sorry. It should be available anytime. The consultants are doing the final, and it should be coming to the Planning Commission as soon as that's completed. As far as the split, I'm okay with that. We can make that work for that project.
All right, Councilman Lallam?
Would you be looking, Roger, to split like towards the end of the year, first year type deal, to split it over 2 years? Is that what the plan is?
The thing that's going to drive it is the engineering study that's slated for this spring.
Yep.
And once we get the final numbers, what's possible, what's not, we could possibly break it into 2 phases or do a over the end of the year type of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
All right.
any other questions? Okay, thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
We will now move on to the sewer collection system, and the only change there was that they added a backhoe in 2021. Otherwise, everything else was consistent with last year's plan. The sewer collection system improvement has held steady with the $325,000 slotted each year, and there is no change to that department as well. Our next department is the sewer treatment facility. Now I will need a motion on this, and this was actually something that changed because of the 2020 budget. We have a biosolids roll-off truck to be purchased in 2022 for $165,000. I will need council action to remove that. That is actually going to be purchased in 2020. That was one thing where at first I think the plan was to outsource that. And then Mike determined that it was probably made more sense to actually just purchase it and kind of save on that outsourcing to buy the equipment and do it ourselves. Is that correct, Mike? Yep. So I would need action on that. Otherwise, the only other change is just an increase of price, which is due to just inflation of equipment.
Councilman Lallam?
Mike, could you come up? Can you explain to me what a biosolids roll-off truck is? I do
Yeah.
not know what that is, no.
Well, actually, you see them around town quite a bit. The roll-off truck, the chassis is just a cab with a long frame, and you'll see them hauling big boxes of like garbage from construction sites. This one's a little larger, a little heavier duty, and we're spending about $31,200 a year paying to have that hauled to the landfill, and that's just for hauling because we don't charge ourselves that tipping fee. So the biosolid screw press process produces a cake. It's a kind of a moist dirt that you can kind of squeeze and stick together, but not squeeze water out of it. That goes to landfill to cover garbage, and we're paying to have that hauled right now. So we move this forward. This truck will pay for itself pretty fast.
Yeah, what is the biosolids? Is that dirt? Is it a?
Well, it's all those solids
I know
used.
the roll-off truck
It's all
is.
those solids that you contribute to the sewer system that have been treated and rendered pretty much properly treated per the regulations, so that it's the same biosolids we used to spread on farmland adjacent to
So
the community.
fertilizer is what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it's free nitrogen. There you go.
Alrighty.
Biosolids.
I'd make that motion to move from 2022 to 2020.
Do we want to do this
Not
all
to-
at?
No, not to move it, just to remove it from the plan.
To remove it.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion by Lallam, second by Mantee. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so our next department will be the solid waste collection. Here there was no changes other than some decreases to the amounts. So again, that is just based off of the bids that we've seen. So the next department was the solid waste disposal department. And the only change there was to add an ADC mixer in 2022 for $59,000. And Mike, you might have to explain what that is.
ADC is alternative daily cover. Each day by permit, we're required to cover the garbage at the end of the day. And we do weekly clay, but every day we have to cover the garbage with something. So this alternative daily cover, ADC, is like a waste paper product ground up with a polymer that you spray over the garbage at the end of the day to make a crust to contain the litter and hopefully contain some smell and keep out some of the critters that might crawl in there till the next day. Otherwise, we would have to put down 6 inches of clay, which consumes more landfill space and uses up the landfill more rapidly. So, and it's rusting out.
Is it biodegradable?
Yeah, it's ground up paper products with a polymer, so I would have to say yes.
And over what time period?
Well, the very next day, we're going to drive right back over, push more garbage over it. But we have to cover daily, the open face where the garbage is being deposited. So the very next day, so that's why it's called alternative daily cover as opposed to like a weekly clay cover. We cover it for the day to secure the site for the night before we
So it
leave.
doesn't last very long. So if you went to a different cell, you wouldn't use the ADC, you'd use clay.
Well, we use clay over the areas that are filled to a certain level because that'll cause the water to run off. And when you're capping them, you use the clay. We have to use 6 inches of clay over all over the waste weekly, but daily, then those other 6 days a week we can save by using this material, saving landfill volume. And you can buy some of this stuff that costs a lot more money, and you mix it with some concrete. And we have areas where we sprayed it on clay. And a couple of years later, the stuff is still there, but it's more expensive. And for the daily use, you don't need to go more expensive. You just need the most cost effective.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So there's no more changes on that department. And then the next department we'll talk about is the solid waste recycling department. No changes there except for the decrease of the yard waste truck. And there again, that's just based off of some current bids that we've seen. So that's the only change. There's no questions on that department. Thank you, Mike. We will move on to the airport fund. Now, there's a couple changes here. The biggest one is the increase of the terminal project design and construction, and that increase was from $6,150,000 to $16 million. I think that change is just most significant due to the fact that we've actually got some more accurate numbers of what the potential is for the terminal. Then we also added a snow removal equipment building in 2024, but then we removed the parallel taxiway construction in 2024. And if there's specific questions on that, I do see that Todd is here from the airport. And if there's
Anyone have any questions? Councilman Lallam?
Do we need, like, we talked about skid steer this year, is that in the 2020 budget, or 2021
I
budget?
think he got that for 2020. Did you? No.
No, we pushed
Sorry.
it out of there.
We found one. I think we found one.
We found the
Yeah,
skid
so
steer?
we'll borrow one from the street department, I believe is how we're going to work it this next year, and then I'll try again next year.
Okay.
Councilman?
Now, I had one more, sorry. On that terminal, does that that's total overall cost, it doesn't factor in any, grants or anything from federal on that, or is that just our cost? of 16?
Just the building.
Okay,
So we're looking at, right now, they're doing the terminal design, and that's where we'll get our hard numbers. They're thinking 21 to 23 million total project cost.
Okay.
But our share stays the same, between that $2 and $3.5 million,
so that 16 is a big number, but that's not all our number?
No,
Okay, that's what I want to know.
yeah,
We will pay it up front, just so you know.
That's awesome.
We'll get paid back for a lot of it. Councilman Vilhauer?
I'm guessing we haven't heard anything within the last month or so on the grant application, or where we're at with the feds on this.
So I have a conference tomorrow and through Thursday with the FAA in Aberdeen, and so that's when we'll sit down. We'll do the terminal design kickoff meeting, and all the FAA participants and the meet and hunt and Helms and Associates will all be present. So hopefully we'll hear something more on the supplemental funding or how they're wanting to work this. But right now they're still looking for funding for the whole project at once.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no other questions. Is that looking good? Okay, so that wraps up our long-term capital plan. I would like to take a minute to thank all the department heads for all your hard work. I know it's fun. We are considering a change next year for this process. The long-term capital has always been turned in by the departments, and it's reviewed by the mayor, and then you see it accumulated here. We're kind of noticing that there again with the dollars needing to determine the schedule and how to plan for it. I think we want to spend a little bit more time diving into that prior to even budgeting for the next year. So my plan is in the early spring to actually form a committee of council members along with some of the departments. Every department head, but to first get the council committee established and then to kind of review where it's at right now, and then to pull in department heads and really get a really solid long-term plan for how we want to see things and see how that projects out along with the revenues that we're projecting. Just to see how close we are to being able to continue to do what we want to do in the future. So I think that'll potentially help, and I think it'll be a good open conversation, as well as that I want to include the park board on some of those conversations. And I think once we all get to really dive into it deeper, I think it helps. So,
All right, Councilman Vilhauer?
Just a comment to that, Chris. Now, I like that idea. I've been through, this is my 5th go-around on this now, and I know the budget work gets done over the course of a long period of time. I mean, months go into it. But by the same token, we don't have any input or any knowledge of what's going on until it comes right down to the tail end of it. So I would like the idea of having a little more input, or at least information earlier on the process, rather than waiting until the tail end.
exactly, and I think that's what this will do. It'll not only the other thing is it'll give an opportunity for the council to see all the departments together. Sometimes what happens is we piecemeal the departments kind of separately, but we hope that we can all start to plan together long term, where sometimes it's difficult when you get up here and you want something and it said no because, you know, they have to choose something else. And I think if we can plan long term so that every department gets their needs met, but it's because it's a plan for the whole city and not just department by department, I think that'll really be a benefit to everyone. So, thank you all.
All right, thank you, Kristen. Appreciate it very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is old business. Do we have any old business? None? Is there any new business? No new business. Look at that. The next item on the agenda is executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2 and Heath, do we need to talk about the contractual matter?
Yes, Madam
Still?
Mayor, I think we could still proceed with that
Okay.
discussion if there's time here this evening.
All right, we do have a reason to go into executive session to discuss contractual matters with our attorney, and so, for a motion for that? I have a motion by Lallam and a second by Y. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you.